Do you like that?
Draw that again.
Okay. We get a bunch of questions about a hinge release. Like, what is a hinge release? How does it work? Can you hunt with one? What are some of the pros and the cons? And then, how do you shoot one? So today I kind of want to run through some of those. I'm going to jump first into what a hinge release is and how it works. So a hinge release is a handheld archery release. The thing that's unique to it, different from a thumb trigger release, is that there is no trigger. So you can't push any buttons. You can't push any buttons with your index finger or your thumb and make this release fire. No trigger whatsoever. What makes this thing fire is an angle change in the release. So as you've got that in your hand, there's a half moon internally here, and you've got a hook, which is going to go on your D loop. And as that angle changes, this hook is sitting on this half moon and there's tension on it. And as that angle changes, eventually what happens is it opens up and it releases, and this drops off the edge of the half moon. It opens up and your D loop fires and your bow fires. So it's that angle change in the release that ultimately causes it to fire. You can't push a trigger, which is why it's nice in helping people get over target panic. It essentially allows the archer to learn to use pull, their muscles in their rhomboid to execute a shot versus pushing a trigger when you see the pin on the target. When you pull your bow back, you do have to keep the tension on your index finger. So as you pull that back, you have to keep that finger locked in over the thumb peg. As you pull back, you want to maintain that because, again, what's going to fire this release is that angle change. So as this angle starts to change, the hook's going to open up and the bow's going to fire. So you got to keep that pressure on your index finger release. If you've played around with the hinge or talked to anybody about a hinge that shoots one, they'll typically tell you that they've had some horror story where, them or a buddy punched themselves in the face as they pulled back because they didn't maintain that tension on that finger. There are releases on the market that have a safety mechanism, so you can hold that safety and pull back. Most traditional hinges do not have a safety. It's just simply that angle. So you maintain that angle, you maintain the pressure on your index finger as you come to full draw. I just want to run real quick through the parts and pieces of a hinge. So like I said, a hinge release is a handheld release, so you can see the handle. This is a 4-finger model. They make 3-finger models. They also make 2-finger models. My personal preference is 4-finger. It gives me just a little added bite here on the 4th finger on my pinky, which I'm going to run through. I'll talk about it a little bit here in a minute. You have a thumb peg. So like I said, the thumb peg is not a trigger. Essentially, the job of the thumb peg is just to give you some added torque as you pull your bow back. So I lay my thumb over that thumb peg and then over my index finger, maintaining the tension on my index finger as I pull back. So that's the thumb peg. So in my release, there's no click, meaning that there's no indication that the release is going to fire. If you've kind of gone down the rabbit hole and you're talking about hinge releases, you often hear that people are shooting a click. What that is a small groove on the edge of the half moon, and as this hook drops into that little slit in the half moon, it's going to make an audible click. That's an indication that release is in a position that you can then execute the rest of your shot and it will fire. So it's an audible indicator that your release is in a position that you can start your pull through and start that release to fire. They make different click lengths, so it's going to make that a longer process to fire. I think a click is great. It's an audible indication that gives you an idea of when that release is about to fire, which then you can focus on the rest of your shot process and shoot. I've just been shooting one for so long without a click that I don't like a click. I just shoot it with no click. So now I'm going to talk about how to actually shoot a hinge and execute a shot with one. Like I said, the first thing you do is you're going to draw your bow. So you keep your pressure on your index finger. You're going to hook the hook over your D loop. As you start to draw your bow, like I said, you've got to maintain the tension on your index finger because if that angle change, it's going to cause the release of fire. So feels a little weird at first because a lot of the torque and pull is going to be on your index finger. Takes some getting used to. Like I said, you have to do it, otherwise you'll punch yourself in the teeth. So as you start to draw your bow, once again, tension on your index finger, your thumb wrapped around the peg, you're going to come to full draw. You're going to find your anchor point. Your anchor point again is going to be between those 2 knuckles on your hand. You're going to anchor in, and typically what I'll do is I will start my aiming process. So I'll line up my peep with my sight housing, put the pin on the target, and as I do so, I'm starting to get into my release. So I'm starting to put a little bit more tension into the other 3 fingers that are going to contact my release. And then ultimately what's going to fire my release isn't, that I'm pulling my pinky. You can do that, and you can punch a hand release the same way you would an index finger release. You can jerk this and dump the string, but that's not what you want to do. What you ultimately want to do is settle into your release, have a nice relaxed hand, and as you start to pull, so you're not pulling straight back with your elbow, you're pulling with your rhomboid, which is actually pulling this elbow back towards this wall. So if you can imagine that, you're looking at it, it's actually going to start to rotate back. And as you increase your tension through your rhomboid, you're relaxing your hand and you're pulling through with that hand, that angle's going to change. It's going to dump the string and the arrow is going to fire. All right, so now I'm going to actually talk you through how to draw, anchor, and shoot with the hinge release. So the first thing to do, you find your grip, take the hinge with the hook, hook it over your D-loop, and then as you maintain pressure on your index finger, you're just going to draw your bow with your thumb hooked over the thumb peg and just come to full draw nice and slow with the pressure over your index finger. Once you get to full draw, you're going to anchor in, again, just splitting your knuckles with your jawline. And then as I find my anchor point, I'm going to start to settle into the finger portion of my release. And then I'm just going to aim. I'm going to say, my shot process, here we go. And just start to pull and relax. And as I do so, that shot's going to dump and I'm going to fire an arrow. So one of the reasons I think you should consider switching or trying a hinge release if you're dealing with some target panic issues is because it allows you to retrain yourself to activate a shot. So you're no longer using a trigger like your index finger to activate the release. I know for me, my target panic developed when I would see the pin, I'm watching the pin hits the target, my brain yells, now, and I would punch the trigger. Over time, that led to me, jerking, and it really did take the fun out of shooting my bow for me. It was really frustrating. So a hinge, like I said, you learn to shoot a hinge, it's retraining yourself how to activate that shot, not with punching a trigger, but with tension as you find your anchor point, and then pulling and relaxing through the shot process, and then ultimately a surprise release, if you will. Over time, you'll come to understand how this release fires, and you'll get used to it. But it is that surprise release, it is that tension versus a trigger that really helped me get over my target panic. And really what it did for me is it made bow hunting fun again. So that's a hinge release, kind of the parts and pieces and how you shoot it. I can tell you from my perspective, it's made me a better shot. It's put the fun, back in shooting my bow and also in bow hunting. One question before I close out, I often get asked, do you hunt with a hinge? And I do hunt with a hinge. I converted over to it and I've never looked back. And the reason I hunt with a hinge is because I think it makes me a better shot when crunch time is at the highest level. I can remember a shot on a bull elk that I took where I came to full draw and this bull stepped out 55 yards. I anchored in and the pin sat there on his side and my brain was screaming, shoot now, shoot now. And I know for a fact if I would have had a trigger, I would have just pounded that thing. And maybe I would have hit it and maybe I wouldn't have. Maybe I would have flinched and completely missed that animal or worse. I can tell you with a hinge, what happened is I went through the process. I settled through, I just kept pulling because again, I couldn't punch a trigger and eventually that shot broke and I make one of the best shots of my life. I put that bull down in 50 yards, it was double lung. So that's why I shoot a hinge. I think it makes me a better bow hunter. I think it makes me more effective in the field. I think it helps with my mental management of a moment when it gets really intense. Not to say that there's anything wrong with other releases, but this is my preference. And once again, that's how you shoot one. If you got questions, drop them in the comments below. I would love it if you would like and subscribe to our channel. It helps us do more content like this. Again, if you got questions, drop them below. It's time to pick up your bow, pick up a hinge release if you're struggling with target panic, and get ready.